we're talking about, obviously On3 drops the recruit rankings list on Friday, and it was some questions, and I'm trying to make the case without poo-pooing it, right? But there is some methodology to why small classes, Nebraska being specific, I get it. You don't ever want to be seen behind certain schools in the Big Ten, but Nebraska is still pretty strategic with how they're recruiting. And, Sam, it's still only June.
Yeah. Yes. So I think by the end of this week, they won't be 18th. They'll probably be, I don't know, 11th or 12th if they get the commits that I think everybody expects them to get. Hayden Ainsworth is announcing today, and I think he'll be picking Nebraska. I don't know that for sure, but that's my sense of it. And then there's probably a couple others that will be making decisions. And so they're not 18th, right? If those guys had announced last week, they wouldn't have been 18th. It's going to be a small class. Heretofore, I thought Nebraska had done a pretty good job of getting some of its top targets, getting guys in the class that I think they believe are difference makers. Of course, it'll bear out whether they are or not based on their performance on the field. What I would say is that you want to watch how Nebraska does with the very top prospects it brings in for visits. And that's not to say that some of the linemen aren't in that group. I would say that they've missed out on some linemen earlier this spring, and they've brought in some very, high level prospects here already in June, and then they'll bring in some more this weekend. And you want to watch how Nebraska does with those, because those are the players that Nebraska believes will get them over the top. And the difference between the first class, the highest ranked class, let's say in a cycle, which will probably be USC or Ohio State, and the 10th ranked class in the country, the difference between the first and the 10th ranked classes is generally greater than the difference between the 11th ranked class and, let's say, the 30th ranked class. And it's absolutely greater than the difference between the 31st ranked class and the 60th ranked class. That's why Iowa can turn in the ranked classes that it does and win a lot of football games, because there's really not much difference between the recruits that Iowa's getting and the recruits that Nebraska's gotten over the last decade. And people don't like hearing that because they follow recruiting rankings. I'm just telling you that if you actually look at the recruiting rankings, there's not much difference.
Yeah, I think
a high level three. Go ahead.
No. I finish the thought, and then I'll go ahead. The high level 3-star.
So, the 345th player is really not much different from the 432nd player.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between the number one player and the number 101st player can be very big. So that's what I mean, is that it's a top end sport. And so the way people should look at recruiting rankings is that what Nebraska really wants to be is first. And that's where they've got to get to the point where they're in the top 3 every year. And I understand. So while I'm saying that it's not that big of a deal that they're 18th, it's not, because they're gonna rise to 11th or 12th probably by the end of the week.
If you
really want to be is third.
If you're developing and hitting your fits, why 3?
Because the value of having one of the top 3 classes in the Big Ten is that you're developing fits that, generally speaking, again, this is not specific, are broadly more talented and have more upside than the 11th ranked class. That's why. So Oregon, for example, is going to develop its play. Why do we think Oregon is a better football program than Nebraska? Well, I don't think it's because of the coaching. I think you put Matt Rule and Dan Lanning on a field. I don't think Dan Lanning is coming up with some strategic plan that's that surpasses what Rule's doing. And I don't think Oregon's offensive coordinator is better than Dana Holgorsen. So it really is about players. And so this thing comes down to the quality of the players that you get. And so I'm not saying that recruiting rankings are gold per se, but they tell a broad truth. And the reality is you would love to be, the higher that you are, the better chance you have of developing the players that you have. And honestly, your misses don't hurt as much. And so there's maybe 5 or 6 guys in this 2025 class that I would describe as just elite, elite recruits. And Nebraska's goal will be to develop, well, every recruit on the team, but especially those 5 or 6. Like, hey, we got these guys, they're really special. We got a Dylan Raiola, we're gonna develop him. But if for whatever reason one of them is not a fit, one of them gets hurt, Nebraska's story over the last several years has been that when they get a top 100 recruit, they've actually kind of struggled a little bit to develop that player. And by recent, I mean we're going back 15 years here. So when you miss on those players and you only get 4 or 5 of them, or let's say a Bubba Starling decides to go to the Kansas City Royals instead of Nebraska football, your margin of error is smaller, whereas Oregon's margin of error is larger. And so that's why you want to be as highly ranked as possible, because you're getting better players.
Yeah, I think the dichotomy is fascinating because there's the perception and then the reality. Because I think if you ask Nebraska's staff, they do their fair share of high-end guys, right? It's been star-studded in terms of targets, and they've also been the school that seems to be first on a lot of guys that end up blowing up, kind of like a C.J. Bruno, right? So.
Yep.
If that's the case, clearly their eye for talent is pretty good, right? Whether it's
I do think so, yes.
Whether they're getting high end guys on campus or they find and offer guys before they blow up, the manner in which they're recruiting, regardless of the outcome, doesn't seem to be based on what their record is or how well they're playing. It's a philosophy in terms of who fits their program. That's kind of how I'm trying to land the plane.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think they, at the same time, when the 5-star came through last year, the tackle,
David Sanders,
they
Jr.
wanted to get him,
and
they didn't get it. So like that's what I mean. It's like if you're gonna put through the time and the effort to have like a little welcome party for the guy and put all this time and effort in, you actually want to get that guy. Now, I'm not saying they did anything wrong. They actually did just about everything they could do to get that guy, other than they're located in Lincoln versus Knoxville. But that's the challenge of recruiting at Nebraska, is you're not going to necessarily be as close as some of the other schools, and you have to overcome, and they know this, and they know it, and they overcome it often. You have to be able to overcome the distance, and you've got to be able to put families at ease that the distance isn't going to be a big deal. Now, Phil Simpson, who's one of Nebraska's assistants and has helped Nebraska recruit Miami really well, is obviously a huge component of how they get a guy like Cortez Mills. Now, I understand that Phil Simpson's not going to coach Cortez Mills, but he's got that ability. Until Vince Marrow left Kentucky to go to Louisville.
Well, quietly, that's a big story down there.
It's a huge story because he was the guy that was getting the Ohio players to Kentucky,
and he said it out loud.
And
he's giving stats of the roster of 3 states that they dominated and talked about how change has screwed the whole thing up. Like he didn't hold back much.
No, and nor should he, because he's a very valuable person. Like, and so like Phil Simpson is too. He's very valuable to Nebraska. That's why they hired him back. And so like that's part of why. He's obviously a good position coach too, but his relationships down there are absolutely huge. It's part of his calling card as a coach. And so like you have to find ways to bridge that gap. I tip my hat to Nebraska that they're able to get a lineman out of Arizona. I don't think it's easy to get linemen west of the Rockies, personally, because I think a lot of them are big guys who want to go to warm weather.
They may be able to make some hay with Chandler just because of the relationships, though.
Yes, now that's helpful, and they've had their moments in Arizona. Obviously Ty Robinson comes from Arizona, and so.
You have a coach that's at the Phoenix Waste, Management Open. They know that area.
That's right, they do. And Donovan Raiola has helped Nebraska recruit Hawaii. Now, if Raiola was not at Nebraska, if Donovan wasn't there coaching, I don't know that they get linemen from Hawaii, because again, I think it's hard when guys west of the Rockies who generally live in warmer weather to much warmer weather if they're in Los Angeles, they don't necessarily love coming east to the Rockies unless they're going to Notre Dame or Alabama or something like that. And so Nebraska's gonna, they've tried. They're trying to get the top linemen from the Southeast. That's also very hard. A lot of those guys like to stay, in the region. So we'll see how they do with that. I think you have to, and they have done a really good job of scouting Kansas City. Got to scout Kansas City. Got to occasionally get a guy out of the Denver area, preferably tight ends or, maybe a defensive end.
Now that's one position I definitely don't worry about. You know what I mean?
No,
tight
neither
ends.
do I.
Yeah.
No, neither do I. But we're just talking recruiting.
No, I got you.
You're not necessarily going to get an elite quarterback out of Colorado, elite receivers that often, but you might be able to get, you're going to be, if you wanted a tight end every year out of the Denver area, you could do it. And you could probably do it in the state of Nebraska too. And so you've got to know where to pick your spots and where to go get players. When Tuioti was here, they tried Michigan. It didn't work out too much. That wasn't great. They had some success in Atlanta. They haven't done a lot of Atlanta recruiting since Becton left. But they're having a hell of a lot of success in Miami. And they never had success in Miami before Simpson. And when I say never, I'm not forgetting DiCaprio Boodle and Levante David, but they didn't have much. This is the most success they've ever had recruiting.
And we had to get David via the junior college route, and there was a pre-existing relationship there. So your point stands.
Yeah, so
definitely stands.
They're doing a good job of recruiting where they want to go,
and you pit that against
they have relationships in Houston.
Sorry, Sam, and you pit that against too the mass exodus over the last 8 years of guys that have come from that state. I mean, some guys before you even got to the next football season have gone back to Florida. So, I mean, you have to be encouraged by that. Now, of course, COVID didn't help. That's for darn sure, right? Bring guys from Florida with nothing to do, and you got to sit around. That's a tough pill to swallow. But I just think it's interesting. It's a fascinating conversation because that's why I think it's important for Nebraska's recruiting philosophy to continue to resonate. Like they have to stay the course. You show some interest in us. If you want to be around us, okay, cool. That's a start. All right, let's see where you're at physically. Do we like you? Okay, we like you. Then here we go. I don't think if both those things aren't, if it's not mutual, I could just see them moving on regardless of the ranking, whether it's a 3-star, a 4-star, or a 5-star. I think it has to be mutual. That's number one. I like that because for every CJ Brunna, right, who nobody had offered, he's a 4-star. He's their highest rated recruit. Now he's just fresh off a visit with Coop and those guys down in Tallahassee. We saw it. Nobody was in Idaho with Kelvin Obot, right?
Right.
The guy's like a 90-91 with multiple offers. So Nebraska can't be discouraged. Hey, you guys call them diamonds in the rough. And Coach Rule said this. Remember, he's like, well, around here, it's like we find diamonds in the rough, and then they go camp at other guys' places, and they offer them, and all of a sudden, they're really good players. He's like, no, we trust our own evaluations. And I think as long as they stay consistent, they've got a chance. But if they win, I do think they could blow the doors off this thing because of the groundwork that they've laid, though, being so principled. If they win, it's going to pay huge dividends. If they don't, it's going to look like wasted efforts. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I think you laid it out well. The 7-on-7 tournament, which had a lot of players at it that were really high-end players, is a huge component in creating the kind of recruiting class that I'm talking about. And that's the kind of recruiting class where you beat Ohio State for a receiver. I could make the argument that the secret sauce at Ohio State, and again, I know college football is a line game. Ohio State has very good linemen. Don't get me wrong. But the secret sauce is their receivers and their defensive backs.
Mm-hmm.
And that at the end of the day, you can't cover Jeremiah Smith. And so it doesn't make any difference what you do at 8 of the other positions. Late in the game against Notre Dame, he just wins. And then they throw him the ball and he catches it and the game is over. And he does that 4 or 5 times a game, and that's he beat Nebraska for a touchdown. Nebraska outplayed Ohio State for 87% of the plays in that game. But then there's the one play where he beats everybody, and it's 6 points. And so you have to find players like that. You have to, and I think Nebraska, without being rude about it, would say we need to find more players like that. That somewhere in there we got to find a Jeremiah Smith, or we've got Cortez Mills has to become something that's very close to Jeremiah Smith as he can, and maybe he can't. I don't know. They're both from the area, and I'm sure they know each other. You've got to be able to find players that can go do that. Not just good players who you develop into, potentially solid pros, but guys that are kind of no doubters that are like, and you can either say Jeremiah Smith or you can say Colston Loveland, and he came from Idaho and Michigan got him out of there, or Montana, one of the 2 states. And Colston Loveland's really good, and he was pretty good the minute he got there. But you got to find players like that, and I think Nebraska knows how to do it. It is probably going to come down to how many games they win and how interested people are in coming to Nebraska after they see what year 3 under Rule is like. If Nebraska wins 10 games next year, it won't surprise me one bit if they have a top 10 national class. It just won't.
Yeah,
if they win 6 or 7, they probably won't have a top 10 national class.
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm further encouraged by just being principled. Like the philosophy behind how they're recruiting. They're going to do their business how they do their business and get that set. Right? There's clearly a methodology. Yeah. There's clearly a plan. Because I go back to some of the stuff that they would say early. They sat at Westside and said to Christian, listen, I understand we have to win. Like, that was like the duh moment in the room. But it was like, hey, do you know what helps us win? Getting guys like you in. Right? But if it's a prove it thing, right, sure, we'll get back to that. But that can't be why you choose your school. Like, I've heard, they're very, very, very consistent. It doesn't matter if you're a 5, a 4, a 3. And I just can't help but to think that's going to pay dividends.
Yeah, so I would argue that Rule's biggest strength,
because if they win, they get more fruit. If they don't win at the level that they want to, the pitch doesn't change. It's still true.
And the guys that are there aren't going to be swayed by a little bit of adversity.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Right. Yes, I do. I would argue his biggest strengths are precisely the things that we're discussing. So creating a culture, creating an overarching system, populating that system with people who think like he does and work as hard as he does, because a lot of this is very hard work. And when I say hard work, it's not digging ditches. So we're not trying to disparage the working man out there at all. But it's hard work, and that it's very tedious, and it takes a long time.
It's just really strategic, too. It's intentional.
Oh, yeah. And it's meticulous detail and all this other stuff. And you got to grind away at it, and it's mentally exhausting. I'm not saying that they're going out there and, building a building. But it's very hard work, and this is what he does. And he's very good at it. And now that they've got Holgerson in place, that's a huge piece of this. Now I think they feel like they can go. They got to go out and win. The thing that I didn't feel like they had the first 2 years, and we all kind of watched it, is I just don't know that they had that overarching vision on offense that got them where they wanted to go, and that's why they made the change they did, and that's why I think Rule has kind of handed it over to Holgerson, and Rule's even admitted he's doing things that make me a little uncomfortable, but I think Rule has grown enough to be able to say, but we got to go there because obviously what we were doing on offense wasn't quite working. And I don't know that that's all Satterfield's fault. I think some of that was just the overall vision. And that's why Holgerson's hire is so important, because it's like he was kind of the missing piece. And I think you put that piece in place and we're going to find out what happens.
Sam, do you think as, the House settlement comes down, a week and a half ago now at this point, you've got kind of the changing landscape of college sports. Do you think as we see more of these high school recruits, certainly transfers, but I think we're seeing it in high school recruits as well, having it become kind of more of a business decision? And I don't just mean an NIL decision. I mean, hey, who can develop me the best? Who can?
I do think branding is important.
Branding's important. Who's getting guys to the NFL? Who's getting, and you've got the NIL opportunities as well. Like you brought up David Sanders, you're like, yeah, I mean, part of Nebraska's problem was they just weren't located where he wanted them to be. Do you feel like fewer recruitments are going to go that way as we sort of lean into this? Hey, these guys, especially these super high end guys, are making decisions about their future and less about what's comfortable?
Yeah, I think fewer decisions will go that way. I agree with you in the sense that, like, 5 or 10 years ago, you might have seen 9 top 100 players go to Georgia. You're still going to see 6, but the other 3 are going to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that.
Georgia
won't be able.
Because like not all 9 guys are going to play at Georgia at the same time, right?
I mean, the biggest thing it did was you can't stockpile talent.
Yeah. Right. Like, so it's not just going to be, hey, like Georgia's going to win the most games and they put the most guys in the NFL. You have to be like, okay, but I'm not going to get a play until year 2 at best at Georgia, maybe year 3, because they've got, 4 first-round guys at my position ahead of me. Like, there's at some point it feels like
Bama was holding like five starting running backs that were in the NFL.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen anymore,
right?
That's right. I think you're going to see, the rich will stay rich, but a few of the players will go somewhere else. I think that's going to happen. I think in basketball very quickly, and it'll be fun to watch Hoiberg kind of navigate this. I think in basketball, if the NIL clearinghouse works, you're going to have much more strategically put together teams. You're not going to be able to go out and buy $10 million rosters in basketball unless you're Duke and, Nike can come in and buy the players and put them on deals and stuff. So, like, I think it'll change in basketball probably a little bit more. And I think you're going to see teams, you're going to see franchises or coaches be more strategic in the way they put their teams together, because you can't just say you get $1 million and you get $1 million and you get $1 million. That's not going to, I think, be a reality for a lot of the schools.
You know what sport I wouldn't want to coach?
Football, yeah, go ahead.
You know what sport I wouldn't want to coach?
What?
Because it was already
baseball
willy-nilly before NIL, would be college baseball.
It's a nightmare.
College baseball would be incredibly difficult to navigate because it was moving and shaking before it, and it wasn't mainstream, so people didn't talk about it, but it was all about, from the junior colleges to guys moving to pre-existing relationships because of how baseball is constructed and playing it in multiple states where you build relationships over time. We're seeing it happen in softball. We're seeing one AAU coach with connections be the key cog for it. That's a lot of how baseball would work. Hey, I'm storing a guy down at Hutch. Hey, I've got a guy over here. Mm-hmm. Hey, it's like baseball would be extremely difficult because if you go from 11 to 14 in scholarships or whatever, like to fund it and to be able to navigate it would be very, very tough, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with that sport going forward. Again, is the clearinghouse going to stick? I can tell you that the commitment from the schools is there. They want the clearinghouse to work. But I don't know. I haven't delved deeply enough into what Texas Tech softball is doing to know exactly how it works. What I know is that, like, when you read about it, it's almost like this is just great. Like, okay,
wait, what?
So like the media frames it that way.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, the media is just like, oh, well, this is awesome, and okay. So, like, I don't know enough about that. What I do know is how these issues are covered, and these issues have been covered in college athletics really for the last 15 years or so as a kind of celebration of unfettered market capitalism that we as journalists certainly know a lot about because we make a lot of money. And so, like, I don't know. It's just, I'm not exactly sure how to tee that one up. And in college baseball, obviously LSU is got a lot of great players who transferred in from other places. Arkansas does too. UCLA grew it, is homegrown. You know, a lot of those guys are high school guys that are in their second and third years at UCLA. So tonight's game's really interesting. UCLA's playing LSU, and that's a clash of styles right there. UCLA doesn't have money. They don't have a bunch of NIL money lying around. So it'll be fun to watch that game tonight and see what happens between two teams that are doing it very different ways.
That's our guy, Sam McKewon, Omaha World Herald. Sam, appreciate the time. As always, we'll talk to you next week.
Take care.